10 days ago I had my gallbladder removed. There's nothing like being knocked out unconscious for an hour, having an organ removed and spending 14 hours in hospital to make you think about life and the things you should be prioritising. What a rollercoaster the last 2 weeks have been. A series of events that have all come together to make me realise that life is really fragile, and there's one thing that you've got absolutely no control over whatsoever, but it's the one thing that we all take for granted, and that's time. Before I get into the subject matter of this video, I'd just like to thank everybody who left a comment on my last video wishing me well for my gallbladder operation. The good news is, so far, it went well. Here I am, I'm alive and kicking, and I'm feeling very healthy. Time will tell whether or not it's been successful, but as I said, so far so good. I'm eating pretty much anything that I want. I've had no ill effects and I'm keeping my fingers crossed. So thanks again for leaving your comments. Back to the point of this video. 2 weeks ago I celebrated my 64th birthday. A few days later it was the anniversary of the death of my dad at age 74, 21 years ago. Then a few days after that I had my gallbladder out, and then finally a few days after that there was the passing of the drummer of my favourite rock band. It got me thinking about my attitude to time. I don't know about you, but when I was younger I always just thought that tomorrow would just come. It wasn't something I gave a great deal of thought to. I felt that there were going to be plenty of tomorrows and it wasn't something to be particularly anxious about. But now that I'm 64, and particularly after spending those 14 hours in hospital that I talked about, I've got a slightly different attitude to tomorrows. There are absolutely no guarantees that tomorrow's going to come. So the attitude that I've got now is that I just want to live each day as it comes and not think too much about tomorrow. When we're younger, it's not that we don't understand that time is passing, we just don't give it a great deal of thought. And I think it's something that comes with age. When you're 24, why should you give it any thought? But when you're 64, it's a whole different kettle of fish. I'm very conscious that I'm in the final chapters of my book of life, and I'm looking to get the most out of that time. Whereas even 20 years ago, when I was 44, I didn't feel quite the same way. A few days after my gallbladder surgery, as I was guzzling back painkillers to keep the discomfort at bay, and let me tell you, there was quite a bit of discomfort on that Monday when I heard this news. The news that I heard was that Rick Buckler, who was the drummer of my favourite rock band, The Jam, had passed away at only 69 years of age after a short illness. When I heard that news, it was a bit of a hammer blow to me. All of my thoughts about mortality, death and the rest of my life came rushing back, maybe partly to do with the fact that I was on morphine-based painkillers, but at the end of the day, when one of your rock idols passes away at such a young age, then you start to question your own situation and start thinking about, when's it your time? I'm at an age where I'm noticing more and more people dying and getting ill, and it's having more of an impact on me now than it ever did, particularly more so than it did 20 years ago when I first retired at age 44. I'm acutely aware that the clock is ticking. When I hear the passing of somebody aged only 69 like Rick Buckler, it brings it home to you, the stark reality of the fragility of life, especially when you reach a certain age. And I think when you get into your 60s, you become very conscious about how many years you've got left on this planet. I know that I certainly do. I've spoken in previous videos that I consider life to be a series of chapters, and each of those chapters, for me, I found them to be about 7 years long. Now if that's the case, and I'm going to live to 84 for example, or certainly my late 80s, then the reality is that I've probably only got about another 4 chapters of the book of life remaining. 5 years ago, when Rick Buckler was 64, the age I am now, I wonder if he thought that he only had 5 years left. Probably not. But if you take my chapter size of 7 years, then he had less than a chapter to go. He was in the final chapter of his life. And when you think of it like that, It's a very sobering thought. For all I know, I might be in the final chapter of my life now. And that's why I think when you get to 60, you start having to consider what it is that you should be prioritising in life. Since I turned 60, I've completely changed my attitude to life in relation to some things, and in particular work. I work a lot less. I've got less ambition. I prioritise time with my family. I prioritise my health over most other things. I mean, after all, without your health, what have you got? Doesn't matter how much time you've got left on the planet, if you haven't got your health, you really are screwed, if you pardon my French. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not living every day as if it's my last. I'm not being reckless about it, but the one thing I am being is intentional about living each day, and I'm not making any assumptions that there will be a tomorrow. I do think you need a different mindset when you reach your 50s and 60s, and you need a particular different mindset when it comes to work. Work should not be a priority at that age. It's time to put the career ambitions and lifetime goals that are related to work and career firmly in the rear view mirror and start to have a different set of priorities towards life. Whether you like it or not, it's later than you think, and you've probably entered the final chapters of your life, and you need to start thinking about what do you want to write on those chapters. If you are fortunate enough to have another 4 or 5 chapters, what do you want those chapters to look like? Do you really want those chapters to be about work? Well, if you do, I think you need a wake-up call, because one of my favourite authors is a lady called Bronnie Ware. I've mentioned her on a number of occasions in my previous videos, and she has written a book called The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying. She's a palliative care nurse who looked after people in their later years when they were near to death. And the second biggest thing that people regretted was they wished they hadn't worked so hard. And in particular, that was one that men regretted the most. Once you hit your 60s in particular, it's absolute folly to still have the same ambitions and career goals and the same things that drive you as you had in your 30s. When you get to your 40s, it's time to start doing a little bit of a rain check on those things and start making some adjustments to your life to prepare for your 50s and beyond. Back in my 30s, I was making long-term plans. I tended to think in terms of 10 years at a time, and it served me well. By the time I hit my mid-40s, I was able to sell my business, exit with a good chunk of money, put it away in a pension pot and retire. It gave me choices. I worked my bollocks off when I was in my 30s, and I didn't have time for much anything else. But now that I'm in my 60s, the last thing I want to be doing is working. What I really want to be doing now is experiencing life. Now, we all have a different definition as to what that is, and what I mean by experiencing life is things like travelling, taking time out to spend lots of time with my family, going on long walks on my own, and filling my mind with positive feelings, not stuck in front of the TV watching Netflix, and certainly not chained to a desk. Fast forward 20 years, and now my life is about essentialism, minimalism, and making a determined effort to ditch nearly all my stuff so that I only have a small number of cherished items to leave my son when I do eventually die. I'm sure that's going to help him enormously. That'll do him a great favour. At least he won't have the hassle that I had when my mother died of clearing out a house full of junk and possessions going back 40 odd years. My goal in my 60s is to have more fun, less stress, more experiences, and lighten the load of life. It's not a time for having stress and anxiety over things. I'm sure there's going to be plenty of time for that in the future when my health does finally eventually fail. The one thing I will say though, when it comes to work, I'm perfectly okay with the idea of doing some work when you're in your 60s and 70s. If you don't want to do any work, I think that's absolutely fine. But if you still want to do work for the reasons, for example, of keeping your mind sharp, then that's okay. My dad was a good role model in that sense. After he retired from the police force at age 56, he did continue to work 1 or 2 days a week for a local firm of solicitors as an agent and an advisor on police matters. And he did that just to stay sharp, to stay in the game, and to keep meeting the people who he'd enjoyed the company of over the previous 20-30 years. Now if that's you, I think that's absolutely fine. Continue working, just don't make it your #1 priority. It doesn't have to be 5 days a week. If you don't need to work, then you don't have to, and you probably shouldn't. The only thing I would say is, don't forget what I said earlier when I quoted from my favourite author, Bronnie Ware. That second top regret of the dying, people wish they hadn't worked so hard. Always be mindful of that. I know I am. I'm more interested in getting life experience now and enjoying myself than putting in hours at the coalface. The priorities now in my life are that I want to go to the gym, I want to go to the cinema in the afternoon, I want to go to the theatre in the afternoon, I want to go on road trips with my wife and see parts of Britain, I want to fly to Europe and see the various cities. The last thing I want to be doing is some form of work. But still, I do work from time to time because I enjoy the buzz. It's just not a priority anymore. It's way down the list. I don't even think it makes the top 10 of the things I want to do with my time in a given week. One thing is for certain. One day, and it's an absolute certainty, is that you're not going to have a tomorrow. When will that be? Who knows? If only we had a crystal ball, eh? I'll leave you with this thought. Those who died yesterday had plans for today, and those who died this morning probably had plans for this afternoon. It's a quote from somebody, I've no idea who, but it's one that I've got written down in my notebook and I often look at. Today though is here, it's mine and it's yours too. What are you going to do with the rest of the day? Thanks very much for watching. I did make a video where my father shared his last words and it changed the course of my life. You might want to watch that one next. Thanks very much for watching. I'll see you next time.